Yes, my presentation is multi-pathway signaling cascades, trophic cascades, and climate change. So I'll be talking about three different types of cascades here, multi-pathway, trophic, and semiotic. And this will be done within the framework of a post-Sabiokian framework as created and proposed by John Deely. So I'll be talking about biosemiotic and physiosemiotic processes and how those interlink. And it's sort of an issue for biosemiotics that we don't get to talk about enough, because a lot of times there's processes that occur from say a mountain or a stream that then have a biosemiotic sort of cascade within organisms. But those cascades within the organisms also create physiosemiotic effects, if you follow me, right? So we have life affecting cascades in non-life, which affect cascades in life again. And I think it's really important for biosemiotics to take a larger sort of integrated role with this, where does the biochemical go into the chemical and physical, and then back into the biochemical, biological, psychological, linguistic, cultural. And we can see here in the rotation of the Earth around the sun that a lot of cascades and a lot of life happens not in a sort of unitary or the same tempo, but rather that, say here, as the Earth goes around the sun, as it approaches the perihelion, it whips around the sun, right? It goes much faster and it goes much slower at the aphelion, even though the area of the space is the same, right? The area between AB and the sun and CD and the sun is the same, but the actual amount of time or amount of space traveled by the Earth is very different, right? And why is this important? This is important because for a lot of cascades and signaling processes, they start off slow, and then as they approach certain critical thresholds, they go much faster, right? And so looking at our first example of this, multi-pathway cascades, in an article by Marijuan et al. In Biosystems, there's this discussion of the idea that it's expensive for complexity to occur in organisms. For example, this is the transcriptional regulatory network of tuberculosis, and how it it hides and is clever in a way in order to avoid being detected. And it has a dormant stage, right? Just as like viruses, they have a dormant stage where they can't really be detected so easily in cells, and that they have an active stage where they can be detected. And that this, in a sense, is a, it takes energy to convert from one form to another, active to passive or dormant to active, but it nonetheless is a highly successful strategy. So they write here, in prokaryotic signaling, robustness is achieved not only by intra-pathway compensation due to the feedback and feed-forward mechanisms incorporated in the structure of the circuit, but also due to the interconnectivity between different signaling pathways. And I think that's really important to remember as we do diagramming in biosemiotics as well, that there are likely multiple pathways going on simultaneously, which could achieve the outcome which we're observing, right? So as scientists, when we see something and we want to have a sort of causal story about it, we have to also understand that there could be other ways that that's going about, and that could be one of many pathways that lead to that result. So again, investment in signaling complexity is expensive, but often worth it. And one of the ways in signaling complexity allows organisms to be more fit is that they get to see more parts of their environment, right? And what do we mean by see? Well, that's of course a metaphor for, you know, when we have more complex signal receptors, we're able to understand parts of the world that might not have shown up to us, right? Parts of our Umgebung that weren't part of our Umwelt before. And so I'm very interested in this question of how, you know, it's sort of an epistemological question, how we can extend our vision, our view, right? And how all life from the very beginning has been working on different repertoires, you know, including this turning into, through habituation, into increased gene repertoires, but also semiotic repertoires that allow, you know, semiosis itself as a form of intelligence. So again, this is the Umwelt-Umgebung interface, and as contrapuntal organisms make up each other's Umwelten, they may be indirectly affected by perturbations in the larger Umgebung, even if semiotically they have no direct sense of those changes. And so I'm arguing that we need intermediaries and translators to detect our past our perception, right? We have, as humans, we have artifacts that we've developed to do that, right? Like electron microscopes. But all life uses other sort of affordances in their environment to also help them see past their own sense perceptions. One way of looking at this is in the words of Alvin Toffler in his preface to Prigogine and Stenger's Order Out of Chaos. And Toffler writes, quote, in terms of second order communication, a host of intriguing issues about whether all the parts of the environment are signaling all the time or only intermittently, about the indirect second and nth order communication that takes place, permitting a molecule or an organism to respond to signals which it cannot sense for lack of necessary receptors. And then he writes, a signal sent by the environment that is undetectable by A may be received by B and converted into a different kind of signal that A is properly equipped to receive, so that B serves as a relay or converter, a conductor, and A responds to an environmental change that has been signaled to it via second order communication. So I'm wondering how this notion of second order communication fits in with our human realm. And that will be the last part in a moment. So semiotic cascades in part have to do with what Peirce called the esse in futuro of semiosis, right? How an object is interpreted, right? Its representative always is reliant on the interpreter, and through that interpretation, it creates a new, you could say, representative of the object, right? As it's understood and acted upon in the world. And in Gunderson and Holling's complex systems theory, we also see that it's open-ended here, right? We see that the tail here from going from RK, omega, and alpha fields, reorganization can also lead to, you know, from the release phase, can lead to another loop, a different way of looking at the world. So I'm just going to briefly play a clip. George Monbiot is narrating about trophic cascades.
It's been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately, those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds, of migratory birds, started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because...
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll end it there, but you get the idea of this sort of biological or biosemiotic, physiosemiotic exchange and how it has sort of cycling properties there. So for the last part of here, and I hope to have some time left for questions, but I don't know. There's the notion of climate change and semiotic legibility. We know that our temperature increase already has affected every organism on Earth, right? This is Bill McKibben back in his The End of Nature, almost 3 decades ago, talks about this, right? That human anthropogenic activity has changed everything. Songbirds, for example, they sing louder but have more distorted communication. So there's a higher noise to signal ratio, and they're also less likely to be able to detect oncoming predators. The sex of many organisms is temperature related. And so as temperatures change, like sea turtles here, you're going to get all males or all females, depending on increasing or decreasing temperatures. So temperature is incredibly important. And so when we talk about biome cascades, with raising temperatures, mosquitoes, their range will grow larger, malaria will spread, and there's all, algal blooms, for example. There are many sort of knock-on effects. And a lot of the sustainability questions have not really been addressed by biosemiotics in the way that they could be. And so this is sort of a plea for more integration. And perhaps we can, people do all sorts of things for their dogs that they don't do for anybody or anything else, right? Like people stop smoking for their dog's health all the time around the world. And so what reasons are enough? How can we create meaning greater than the status quo? And we know that we can't go back. There's no, Humpty Dumpty recreating nature, and that secession is not orderly, predictable, or reversible, right? As William Jordan III writes in Sunflower Forest. Forming ecologies is not a process like mixing paint, in which pigments can be added in any order. And we as biosemioticians know this as well as anybody. And yet we could be doing a lot more hand in hand with permaculture, with conservation science. And I'd like to see more research in looking at biosemiotics as a conservation science. Precaution is too late, but interrupting feed-forward positive feedback loops perhaps is something we can contribute to. And for example, here from Julia Watson's recent book, Low Tech, these are village members in Iraq, in the village of Madan, and they have floating islands to deal with the flood season, right? So this is a sustainable sort of, you could say, Umwelt-specific building, right? So how does design architecture in a sort of biomimicry sense arise? Also with indigenous ways, right? Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote this New York Times best-selling book, Braiding Sweetgrass, she's a conservation biologist.
I'm sorry, Yogi, please follow to the
conclusion. Finally, how can we, this is my final slide, and this is a living bridge in Cascades in India. It's been around for like 500 years, and they can support 35 people at a time. And nothing else will work in this area, right? Because it would, the tropical rainforest would destroy any non-living technology. So how can we as biosemioticians create more living technologies? Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Yogi. And we have time for one question. Don?
Yes, Yogi, not so much a question, but very, very wonderful presentation. And Timo didn't get a chance to speak about this in his presentation, but he talked about semiocide. And I think the bringing to the attention of the public the issues of semiocide and semiotic pollution and the kinds of things you talked about here would be a very effective way to getting biosemiotics into the conversation, the mainstream. So I really support these initiatives that you're proposing here.
Thanks, Don.